This call is being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle Talk podcast, where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds from Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins. Tonight, John J.A. Pitts learned to love science fiction at the knee of his grandmother, listening to her read authors like Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard during his childhood in Kentucky. That sounds a lot like my childhood. He is the author of the Sarah Beauhall urban fantasy series, including Black Blade Blues, Honeyed Words, Forged in Fire, and now the fourth book, Night Terrors, brand new, coming out from Wordfire Press. So welcome, John.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm very glad that you could join us. All right. So, and your website, by the way, is japitts.net. So the new book is Night Terrors. It is the fourth book in the urban fantasy series about a woman named Sarah Beauhall, who is described as a blacksmith and a dragon slayer. And in this particular book, she goes searching in what you call in an alternate dimension, a sideways dimension of nightmares, monsters, and a new bad guy called the Bowler Hat Man, who's gathering a large army. So this all seems very strange. We got blacksmiths and dragon slayers, but I know very well, because I started reading this book, that we open up in a very modern household with a woman, throwing up in the bathroom. So,
Right.
Explain to me the world of Night Terrors and how we're coming to it in the fourth book.
So it's an urban fantasy set in Seattle, Pacific Northwest. So you've got all the trappings of your modern day world, but it's based and steeped in Norse mythology. So your main character, Sarah, who happens to be a blacksmith, reforges a sword in the first book that turns out to be a magic sword, and it's the sword Graham, or Fafnir's Bane, which is a dragon slaying sword, and that's how she becomes aware of the other parts of the world that has been hidden from most people. And in this installment, she's dealing with the repercussions of the previous battles with a necromancer and his cult into book 3, and how it has impacted her partner, Katie, who has also started exhibiting powers once the sword was reforged, and she's finds that she has a lot of abilities with her singing. She's a skald or a bard, and they're all part of a reenactment group, the SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism, and Katie happens to also be a school teacher, a elementary school kindergarten teacher. And so this book, we're dealing with the after effects of the ramifications of the first 3 books and how that's affecting Katie's life. And Sarah, of course, has to start dealing with that.
So I find it interesting that she's a member of the SCA. I think this is the first time I've actually read anything where a main character is a member of the Society for Creative Anachronisms, which is a real thing, and is if it didn't actually exist, you would really need to invent it for fiction. I mean, that is, do you have any past with the SCA, or did you just think it was a cool thing to put in a book?
Well, I have friends who have been in it over the years. I mean, I first heard about it when I was in junior high school. We'd run around the woods with sticks and pretend to be, chasing dragons and elves or whatever. And I had a buddy of mine who, at like 13 or 14, was a scout, and he would go up to the Pensac Wars in Pennsylvania and be a scout for them. So I've always been aware of it. I have friends out here. Once I came out here, there's a kingdom of Antir, which is pretty prevalent up here in the Northwest. And so I thought, I'm going to write this story about a woman who's a blacksmith in modern day Seattle, and why on earth would she have any experience with a sword?
Yeah.
Okay. So
in fact, if you were to tell me, hey, I know this girl in Portland, she's a blacksmith, the things that I can think of only a couple things that you could be doing. You could be making costuming. In my limited imagination, you'd be making costuming. You'd be making stuff that hobbyists would wear, and you'd be making stuff to sell on the convention circuit, like armor and things like that. So it would make sense that she would be a part of a community like that. When you say up here, you moved out here, you're talking about you're in Seattle yourself, is that right?
Right. Yeah, I moved out here from Kentucky back in '97, and
What's that like? I
have
mean,
no desire to
to
go
come
back.
from the 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 deep South, the traditional South, to
Hmm.
I don't know what you would call it, a bastion of post-modernity.
Yeah,
what's what's it like to switch that way?
I tell you, I have a lot of good positive things about Kentucky. I mean, it was a good place to grow up, but I'm in high tech as a day job, and there just
Yeah,
really wasn't any jobs there.
sure.
And so I came to the West Coast looking for work and settled in the Seattle area, found out that I really love it.
Yeah.
It is a great place to raise kids. There are, I cannot even begin to tell you the number of artists within like a 100-mile radius north or south in this corridor. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and it was funny when I was in college. I wanted to go to Clarion or Clarion West more than anything. And I took a job out here. And after I'd been here about 3 weeks, I realized this is the home of Clarion West. Of course, I was married, had a kid, and full-time job, so I couldn't actually go to Clarion West, but I could participate around the fringes and stuff. So, I mean, it's a great place to live. It's kind of expensive, but I have good work here, and I've raised my kids here, so it's working out pretty nice.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, I wanted to talk about urban fantasy a little bit because certainly I think we all grew up with high fantasy, good old
Hmm.
fashioned, like, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. Urban
Hmm.
fantasy, I don't know very much about, although I know more now than I used to because I've interviewed a number of writers. But, what do you think? Like, did you plan to get into this as a genre? Especially, I find it fascinating that your main character is female, but to be writing, how did you find yourself in this genre, and what do you think people should know about it?
Well, it's really interesting. Most of the genre, if you look out, involves like a mix between the romance novel coming over to paranormal romance and then bringing down to that hardball detective stuff. So you've got really amazing authors like Kat Richardson and Patty Briggs and Carrie Vaughn and they write mainly about Carrie and Patty and then more about werewolves and vampires, right? The very traditional horror tropes over into more of a paranormal romance slant became kind of what started out, in my experience, for what we call modern day urban fantasy. I mean,
Hmm.
there's older stuff, The Last Unicorn, that type of those artists in that time did urban fantasy, but this is a slight different variation on that. And I just found I love to read it. I mean, there's certain books. I'm a really busy guy, right? I mean, I've got tons and tons of things I'm doing all the time. But man, when a new Patricia Briggs books drop or a Carrie Vaughn, I just stop what I'm doing. I go buy the book and I read that book till I finish it. Sean McGuire's another one. I love the Toby Day stuff. And and what it is, it's like meeting people I really understand and I love and I want to spend time with them.
Hmm.
And so that's what I gravitated to. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of high fantasy. Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings completely changed my life. I read it at 11 years old, and I didn't realize, as much as I'd read by that point, it just totally shifted my way of thinking about things. So, to me, the urban fantasy, I kind of fell into this story because I was writing a short story for an anthology invite,
Hmm.
and then as I turned the short story in, which you can find in my collection. It's basically the first couple chapters of the first book, and I turned it in, and the editors at the time said, we're going to buy the story. Absolutely, we're going to buy the story. It comes out in an anthology called Swordplay. And so
Hmm.
the whole anthology was about short stories involving magic weapons, right? But that's why I decided to take a different tack on it and said, well, what if I'm in competing with a lot of really good writers? What's my chance of getting in the book, right? So
Hmm.
I decided I would go from a couple different slants. I write a lot of strong female characters. I was raised by a single mom,
Hmm.
so I thought, well, I would do that, and then I thought, well, the warrior is always going to be the main character. So what if I didn't do that? What if I did the maker, not the
Hmm.
user? So I started out with a blacksmith, and then everything just kind of fell in place from that. And I'm a real big fan of Norse mythology, and so as I started putting all these different pieces together, the character of Sarah came to me, putting together all the little things. And I use tarot cards. I'll use runes to kind of work out my personalities of characters as I'm trying in the early stages to figure this stuff out. And
Do you mean in terms of using like the runes and so forth as a kind of an oracle to just kind of point you in a direction that you don't necessarily choose yourself? So there's a certain amount of discovery about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. I have a friend of mine who, Amy, she's going to be at Oricon this weekend. She's really a good glass artist, and she made me a set of runes, and I was learned how to pull them and with the one way. I know there's 1,000 different ways to do it, but and I would sit down and I would ask the questions and I'd draw the runes, and I would use that for most of my characters in this series to say, well, what are their underlying motivations? And of course, sometimes I would cheat, not take what exactly it gave me because I wanted them to do something slightly different. But that was the general gist of how I started out with it.
I love this idea. I love that idea of using runes or really anything like that. But I think you're the first person I've talked to who sits down and uses rune drawing to choose the personalities of the characters. I really like that. Do you? It's funny if somebody were listening to this and they were going, okay, but I still don't get it. What is urban fantasy? If you were to choose something from, say, pop culture, you go, oh well, it's kind of like this, but with this. What out there would be a good way of describing what urban fantasy is?
Well, the traditional understanding of urban fantasy, as far as I've been able to pick it up over the last couple of decades, is it's a modern world where something fantastical happens. So frequently it'll be a werewolf or a vampire, where the rest of the world doesn't know these things exist, right? So
in a sense, a vampire, like a straight up vampire story, like Forever Night or Twilight, even, or
some
whatever.
of the more modern stuff, Twilight, right? Or like Stranger Things, the Netflix show.
That's true.
Or
I was thinking about Stranger Things because you've got they're slipping into this sideways universe, just on the other side of our own. She has to go hunting for her girlfriend, in this, and that's very similar to Stranger Things. In fact, I suppose we could do worse than to say this has a setup that is somewhat similar to Stranger Things.
Which I think is really cool, since I wrote that book before that came out, so it makes me feel
of course.
It followed me. I didn't follow it.
Not that it would matter, but yeah.
Right, not that it would matter. It's like whatever brings people to the story, right? I mean, that's what we do, right? We put story out there, and we want people to be entertained. I mean, you heard that this weekend was like one of the largest weekends in movie goers, right? The box offices broke all kinds of records this past weekend.
Is that so?
People are desperately seeking an alternative to reality at this point.
Their stress and I can completely understand that, and sometimes you'll hear from kids who are, being a kid is stressful, being in middle school is stressful, and sometimes I'll have friends, I've even gotten some of these myself, where a kid writes and goes, it's been really stressful, things are rough, and your books are helping me get through. I think that's books definitely can do that. In fact, in this case, this is the fourth book in a series. So do you have people who are fans of Sarah Beauhall who want to know what she's up to next, to maybe give you advice, friendly advice on what they want to see?
Yeah, I do have a decent fan base, and I get letters, and my favorites are the letters that contradict each other, of course. So you talk to any author, I'm sure you've experienced this. She's a blacksmith, and so I did a lot of research. I'm not a blacksmith at all. I deal in databases all day. But and so the YouTube is a wonderful thing, so I can watch people do stuff. I went and visited blacksmith. I read tons of books on it, and so I was very particular to make sure that I got what I thought, all my blacksmithing down and how you do these things. And so, of course, I probably got 9 or 10 the first week emails or letters from blacksmiths who said, "I love this. Is great. This is awesome. I can't believe you got a blacksmith main character. Can I tell you what you did wrong?"
Sure.
Sure. Why not? And so as they told me this stuff, and everyone was really nice, but it was like I started getting contradictory things. So you have to do this. Well, no, absolutely never do that. And I just find it amusing. But the fan base is it's interesting. They want what they want, and they want it when they want it. And unfortunately, the publishing industry doesn't always run along with their timeframes.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, no. Wow, that's exciting though. I love the notion of the advice that that contradicts too. I completely identify with that. People go, "You need more of this." I've had people go, I really loved the first one, but the second one kind of went in a different direction and I thought that was a huge mistake." And then another person will go, "Love the new direction, big improvement." And you're like, I really have no idea which of you guys to listen to. And but I appreciate it.
Oh,
That's
dude,
that's wonderful.
one of my favorite things. I got interviewed. So I live out here. There's a little town nearby called Issaquah, and
Yeah.
I have Sarah show up in Issaquah to go on a run. She jogs, and so she goes and runs from Issaquah to Marymore Park. It's 11-mile run, and this guy is super fascinated with the newspaper there. So he interviewed me, and he goes, "In that Mexican restaurant you mentioned in Everett, in one of the other towns up here, I love that restaurant." And I went back just to double check, and I never mentioned a name. I never mentioned a road. All I said was a city, right?
Uh-huh.
But people find themselves in the work.
Wow.
He was sure that I meant his favorite restaurant.
Uh,
And I would make up, most of the places in my books are made up. I mean, sure, there are coffee shops. Okay, coffee shops in the Pacific Northwest. Can you imagine the total number of coffee shops we have up here? And so I just made one up. But there's people who swear they've been there.
oh, that's amazing. But that's wonderful. I mean, that's really great. Just to imagine people, reading this, they can picture it. They think they know the world that you're talking about. In a sense, they do, because any coffee shop you describe is just an amalgam of many coffee shops. But
Right.
also that it's so keenly personal. And then you get this benefit of the fact that they're actually sharing that with you. Let me ask you about process.
Okay.
So you're working on a book like this. Uh, how many months, like if let's say for the sake of argument, you know that you need to get a book turned in, uh, I don't know, 4 months from now, 6 months from now, what do
Mhm.
you do to get that book going? I mean, how do you, and I assume that's pretty typical. I assume you don't usually have a whole year to work on something. So like,
Yeah.
how do you start getting, do you do 1,000 words a day? Do you go camp out a library? Do you stay home? And what's your process?
Well, I do a couple of things. Number one, I'm an outliner
Mm.
in general. So I will work on my outline until I get it finished. And that takes me, at this point, based on the 6 novels I've written, 6 weeks to 2 months to outline a novel.
Yeah.
Um, and then I start drafting. And so far, drafting time has been 6 to 8 weeks.
Hmm.
So about 4 months I can write a novel. Now,
6 to 8 weeks, but draft. I mean, so that's amazing. Well, you got so 6 to 8 weeks, so 2 months to
yeah,
do 90,000 words, right?
yeah, about
So
100, but yeah.
100. Okay, so 50,000 words a month.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 25,000 words every 2 weeks. So that's 12 and a half
1250.
thousand words
Right.
a week, which is
Yeah.
what, 2,000 words a day? That's a pretty
So
good output.
what I
That's
do is
amazing.
I map it all on spreadsheets. That's what I do. But
Ah,
I plan 2,500 words a day,
yep.
which we call a lake. You haven't heard of that? The
No,
author
I've
Jay
never
Lake.
heard that.
There was an author Jay Lake who died a few years ago. Very prolific writer, and he would typically write 2,500 words at a sitting, and a bunch of other writers coined it as one lake. So anyway, so I would write about. My plan was 2,500 words a day, 6 days a week.
Mm.
That way, something comes up, I can adjust throughout the week. One of the things about goal setting is you can't make it so big that you can't accomplish it, because then you start failing and then everything goes to pieces, right? So what I do is I say I'm going to do 1,250 a week, or 12,500 a week, 2,500
Yeah,
a day. But if today I got 3,000 and tomorrow I only do 2,000, it works out in the wash,
mm,
right? Now, there's going to be
sure.
extraordinary circumstances. I do have a day job. My kids are, one's out of college and one's just going into college. So, there are points as they grew up where things got more hectic than others. And, one novel took me 12 weeks, not exactly 8, but the other one took me 6. So it kind of averages out.
Sure. Yeah, no, I expect. And also, I'm sure that life intervenes and you might have months that go by where you're like, I swear to God, I'm getting started any day.
Any
Or maybe
second
you're
now.
working all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Well, it depends. Yeah, I tell myself every day I'm going to finish this novel, right? But I quit writing for a year,
Yeah.
and to get back to it, I was a little. So if you haven't noticed, the fourth book in this series came out from Wordfire Press,
Hmm.
instead of the first three came out from Tor. So Tor dropped the series, and Wordfire Press picked it up. So when I was waiting, I had already written the next two books. I'd written 4 and 5 when we were waiting for Tor to make a decision.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, so I kind of didn't do anything for a year because I'd already had the two books written, and I was honestly depressed about the whole
Yeah.
thing. The publishing industry is
Of
not
course.
always kind. I mean, the people involved. I mean, I have no qualms about the people that I worked with. My editor was fantastic, but so I didn't do anything. So what I started doing last year in the August timeframe, I was just tired of not doing the things I felt like I needed to do. So I started writing a serial, and
Uh-huh.
I would post every night for my blog to go out the next day at 6 a.m. An ongoing story that I did for 434 straight days.
That's cool. Was it related to any of this, or was it all new world,
It's all new work.
all new series?
It's a second
Yeah.
world fantasy kind of. A young acolyte leaves the monastery on the edge of a swamp to go out to save the world on this dream quest that he's got, and he fights monsters and slogs through swamps and uncovers treasure, and it's your typical swords and sorcery thing. But I've written the equivalent of 6 books since last August,
Hmm.
almost
Wow.
500,000 words last August.
Did you get feedback on? I'm curious. So you put this serial. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's like something that Dickens would have done. You're putting this serial on your blog, and how do
Yeah,
people
every day.
find it? How do people know that you're doing it?
Well, I mean, when I blog, it cross posts to Twitter and to my Facebook account. So if
Yep.
you go to japitts.net, look at the bottom right hand corner, it's right there. It's called the Cleric Journal, and it's this young kid, and he's writing to the guy who runs the monastery, Father Mulcahy. And every day it starts, "Dear Father Mulcahy," and he tells about his day. And
Love
so
it.
it's right there in the bottom right hand corner. It says, start here, and I've got, like I
Start
said,
here.
434 straight days. And what I've done is I've talked to my agent about it, and I'm going to go back, as I've broken them up into the equivalent of what would be complete storylines. So, like I said,
Yep.
it's the 6th book I've written. And now I've got to go back to the beginning book, and my agent read it, and she loves it. But she said, we need to make it more novel-like, because as a
Yeah.
serial, where frankly, the only editing that has been done to this is I read it to my wife
Sure.
every night.
Yeah.
And if something jumps out at us, and what does that mean or whatever, I'll tweak it a little bit before I post it. But really, this is first draft stuff.
Of course.
This was, to me, I just really needed to write something that I loved, and whether anybody liked it or not, and something that was getting me putting words down every single day. And it's like a year plus, like 14 months of NaNoWriMo, right?
I think that's
And
fabulous. It's a really great
so now I got to
experiment.
go
I mean,
back.
it's a beautiful experiment. Go ahead.
Now I got to go back and turn the first one into a book and get it to my agent
Yeah.
and see if New York wants to buy it.
Yeah. Wow, that's really fabulous. That's fantastic. Okay, so anyway, the new book is, as we mentioned, the new book is called Night Terrors. It is the 4th book in this series. Can people pick up this one and start here? I mean, do you recap what went on in the other books?
I do. I mean, you're going to learn more about the world if you start at the beginning, of course, but this one is a self-contained story, and it gives enough information to give you grounding on what's going on and why. But
So I could maybe
that
start
started
here
it.
and then go back.
Yeah. I've gotten quite a few letters from people who have. I keep saying letters like it's 1970.
Hey, I know what you're
Emails
talking
or
about.
blog posts.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, no, I still say letters. The letter column. Absolutely. Wow. Okay, well that's fabulous. I also love the fact that the covers all look alike. So this 4th one, Night Terrors, has the same sort of model with her sort of ash blonde pixie cut. Actually, I guess it's a platinum pixie cut. and it's awesome. So this is a really, really great looking series. Very cool. New book, Wordfire Press. The book is Night Terrors. John Pitts, I've really enjoyed talking to you and hearing about your process, and I hope that I get to hear soon about what happens with your really fascinating blogging experiment. I think that's amazing.
Well, yeah. Look at the website. I'm sure I'll keep posting.
All right. Thank you for being on. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for the interview.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Bye.